Thank you for tuning in to the Practical Preservation Podcast. Please take a moment to visit our website, practicalpreservationservices.com, for additional information and tips to help you restore your historical home. If you've not done so, please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, and also like us on Facebook. Welcome to the Practical Preservation Podcast, hosted by Danielle and Jonathan Kepperling. Kepperling Preservation Services is a family-owned business based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, dedicated to the preservation of our built architectural history for today's use as well as future generations. Our weekly podcast provides you with expert advice specific to the unique needs of renovating a historic home, educating by sharing our From the Trenches preservation knowledge and our guests' expertise, balancing modern needs while maintaining the historical significance, character, and beauty of your period home.
Today on the Practical Preservation Podcast, I have Laura Crook with me from the Doctor's House Museum. She's the director there. Thank you for joining me today.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
So tell me about your background.
So I'm a volunteer with the Glendale Historical Society. I have a background in theater arts. And so giving tours and memorizing quick little factoids about things comes pretty natural to me, which is helpful if you're a docent showing off a museum. I started off with the Glendale Historical Society as a volunteer with a home tour that we would do annually. So it was a really great way to get my feet wet and to point at things and say, look at this, it's old, isn't it amazing? And then they basically gave me keys to this house museum, and now I'm in charge of it, and it's so fun.
That is very fun. And I do joke that, you know, when you're a tour guide, nobody knows if you're making things up.
Oh, nobody checks my work. I mean, yeah. I guess they can watch this and be like, oh, she's been paying attention, or, oh no, what did we do? But I mean, I've been volunteering there since 2013. So it's been a hot second. So hopefully I'm saying everything correctly. I've done a stint on the board of directors with the Glendale Historical Society. I've volunteered not just for the museum, but also for events like art galas and other fundraisers. I started our bar event that we do, and we're bringing that back up soon. So we're pretty excited about that.
It sounds like you're very busy volunteering.
Yeah, no, but I mean, it's so worth it. It's so fun. You got to.
Yeah. So what drew you into history or preservation?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that just spoke to me always. I bought a house here in Glendale. It was built in 1926. It has a rich history where the first person who lived there was the stage manager to the Alex Theater, which is one of our still standing historic Art Deco theaters that we have in Glendale. And so I just always felt a connection to it. And preservation is just one of those things that matter, you know, like it tells the story of where we've been, where we're going. And so I think it's one of those things that we do need to protect and cherish and learn from.
Yeah, I agree. There's a book that I read probably during the pandemic. It was a virtual book club, but it was the slavery in the North. And it was talking about slavery was in the North, but we stopped acknowledging those places associated with it. And so places are really important to remember our history. And so, yeah, I think that preservation is very important in that way.
Definitely, I agree. And like Glendale also has its own past with it being a sundown town. And so it's my dog is interjecting, by the way, if you hear.
Oh, I can't even hear.
Okay, great. But no, it's one of those things that we do need to learn from and grow from. And how can we look towards our future if we can't acknowledge our past?
Right. Exactly. And do better.
Exactly. Yes, please. Yeah. Please so much. I'm going to pick up my dog because she's whining at me.
Oh, that's okay.
Disappear. You can look the.
No, that's okay. So tell me about the Doctor's House Museum and the Glendale Historical Society.
Yeah, so the Doctor's House is actually what started the Glendale Historical Society. Okay. It was set to be demolished in 1979. It was only one of two examples of Queen Anne Eastlake style Victorian houses that were left in our entire city. So it literally took one person to say, hey, we can't do this. We need to save this. It was going to be demolished for condos to be put in. And so the city agreed, a group of people agreed, came together as volunteers and started the Glendale Historical Society. So through their efforts, which is just so mind-boggling to me today, like it is like herding cats just to get people to respond to an email typically,
Right.
let alone show up every single weekend for 4 years to rebuild a house.
Yeah.
So they cut it in half right down the middle, schlepped it uphill about 5 miles, and the city had a spot in Bram Park that we were able to put it in. And so they built it there. And now we lead tours on Sundays and we're just in the park.
Oh, well, that sounds like a delightful location. And I'm part-time executive director for the Lancaster County Historic Preservation Trust. And very similar story. Our headquarters, it was going to be demolished during urban renewal for a parking garage because we need more of those. And they actually, built the parking garage around us. So we're like in this little alcove of the parking garage, but they did save the building. So yeah, it's
That's
it's
so
it's
awesome.
interesting to me about the same, well, a little bit earlier, but that was like the early preservation movement. People were saying, I can't, that we don't want to lose any more buildings. We've already torn down so many. And that was
Yeah.
really the start of it.
Absolutely. And then the other Queen Anne East Lake, which is the Good House, actually does have a structure built around it specifically as well now. And it's really great because I mean, through the efforts of this one house and all the people putting their hard work into it, we've been able to help advocate for other houses throughout the city. I mean, like the Good House is still standing, of course, in the Alex Theater. But also too, we've created historic districts and it had this house not faced its challenges and people come together, who knows what our city would look like currently.
Yeah, it's
So
it's
it's pretty
it's
awesome.
important work. So you talked a little bit about the saving and the restoration of the house. You said that did volunteers do the restoration work?
They did.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's so mind-boggling to me when you think about it, because this is what, like 1980. It's not
Yeah.
like they had the internet. They couldn't go onto eBay and just buy things. They couldn't, they had to go
Right.
to libraries, they had to go to
Mhm.
antique stores. They had to do a lot of legwork that
Yeah.
we wouldn't have to do today.
Yeah.
And we're
That's
still,
very true. Yeah.
yeah, and we're still an all volunteer organization
Mhm.
40 some years later. So I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, even this old house was like still sending out, like it didn't look like a glossy magazine. It looked like a newsletter
Mhm.
in those times. So yeah, they were doing their best with what they had.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And I mean, like
yes.
we still are, you know.
That's all any of us can do, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So tell me about some of the events that are sponsored by the Glendale Historical Society.
Yeah. So right now we're working on a cemetery tour, that we have a historic cemetery just kind of down the road, and one of our doctors is actually buried in there. It was the oldest cemetery in Glendale, so it was built in the late 1800s.
Mhm.
And yes, we're going to tour that. And then behind our house museum, Leslie Brand, who was the big developer of Glendale, has this pyramid that he's buried under, and his family is buried in the same plot, and it's normally gated up. So we're going to be able to go behind there. So we just kind of have different events from, the galas and restoration expos. A lot of things actually did take a break during the pandemic.
Right.
So it's been interesting kind of coming back and rebuilding. One thing that we used to do at our museum was we called it Beneath the Veil, which was every other October, where people would come into the house. Now, keep in mind, it's smaller rooms and the
Yeah.
ventilation isn't amazing. And so during peak COVID seasons, it's really hard to get volunteers who are willing to risk getting riddled with COVID,
Right.
especially during, the winter seasons and the holiday seasons. But it was really cool. We would explore why it was that Victorians were really obsessed with death.
Mhm.
And we would have a seance and living dead photography, hair wreaths, that whole thing. We'd also talk about old things that came up from that, like Saved by the Bell, how when people passed, it was kind of a fear that they would be buried alive because
Right.
people fainted, people were sick, things happened. And so literally people would have a string tied to their finger when they were buried. And if you happen to wake up in a coffin, you can just wiggle your hands and a bell would ring outside. So that's where Saved by the Bell actually comes from. It didn't come from Zach Morris, which I was shocked and appalled to find out. And then we also used to do candlelight tours, which unfortunately same thing, especially, you know, COVID and Christmas. It's kind of hard to get people to volunteer and be willing to risk getting sick and risk getting their family sick, which is totally understandable. Like I wouldn't. So our Victorian Christmas magic has to wait a little bit longer before we can revive it. But that's why we're doing our cemetery tour this year, because it's something that we can do more outdoors. Oh, there goes the dog. And feel safer in a cemetery.
Yeah. And so I when we reached out, we were asking about your paranormal investigation. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we did that during the height of COVID. I actually have done 2 paranormal investigations at our museum. Basically, as a docent, that's one of the big questions that we get asked all the time is the doctor's house haunted? Is the doctor in? And we had to investigate, because if you don't know the answer to something, you got to find out, right?
Right.
So we had the experts come in, and I'm not the best person to be exploring haunted places with. Like, I will leave you behind the moment anything spooky happened. And luckily, I didn't have to abandon anybody. We did have a couple of eyebrow raising moments when we did our investigations, but aside from that, it was pretty calm. It was pretty nice. We still have a link up on our website if you want to watch the whole unraveling of our paranormal investigation.
Okay.
There were a couple of moments. We did have those devices where the lights beep and boop. And so we started asking some specific questions, and it was interesting how almost conversationally they would be like, do, 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 do. So you'd say like, oh, do you know about this? And then it would light up and go off and on. So that was pretty interesting, but that's about as
that's
jazzy as it got.
Yeah, that's fun. There's a house museum here that they do paranormal investigations fairly regularly. I think it's like one of their fundraisers. And people are really into it there. So I have never been to one, but they're fun to do. We've gone to some like where they have, get dinner and then a paranormal investigation of the historic restaurant. So, there's fun angles that people find to do.
I love it.
Yeah.
We've done some other things in the museum as fundraisers before. I mean, aside from just general events, but one thing that we do for our gala is we used to do dinners at the doctor's house, but now that I'm in charge, it would be Kraft macaroni and cheese and cut up hot dogs. So luckily I've been studying wine throughout the pandemic and on. So now we can do wine tastings at the doctor's house. So
that's a fun event. Yeah.
Yeah. And a little less scary than like a ghost hanging out. We did, however, going back to the paranormal investigation, one thing that was fun was they left audio recording devices up just to see if anything would be caught on a different frequency. And we heard some mysterious howling at one point, but it sounded not like an actual dog. It sounded more like a person making howling noises. So that was pretty interesting. That's your spoiler. I should have given you a spoiler alert, but I didn't.
That is very interesting. Maybe they're trying to play tricks on you.
Maybe. We were talking about alpacas at the moment, and so my theory is if it was an entity, let's say, maybe they weren't familiar with alpacas and they just did their best to participate.
Sometimes you get in those conversations with people and they do things like that.
Exactly. So you never know.
Oh, some of the other and I think you mentioned it early on, but some of the other events that I saw you do a wide range of events.
We do, yeah.
Like some of like the examining like the harder histories, like the sundown towns and things like that, I think is really important for and I've noticed that trend in the past 4 or 5 years in programming for museums and preservation organizations, I guess is the right word.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's just, again, it's very important. We need to acknowledge our history in all ways, shapes, and forms.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Um, so tell me, I saw on the website that there's a documentary about the doctor's house. Can you tell me about
There
that?
is. So Peter Roosh, who was our curator, did basically a grand tour that you can watch virtually from anywhere. So if you go onto our website, which is lindalehistorical.org, you can find a link to the documentary and literally see the house in its entirety. You can see our replicated wallpaper, our Wooten desk, our organ was donated by an organ donor. That's my doctor's house joke for you. But you could see all of the dolls, all the intricate things that we have going on in there. And it's quite fascinating. And Peter is the best. Like you can't get a better tour, not even from me. I'll literally just be like, look at this. And it's great. Let's move on. But it's a magical experience. So I suggest that you take some time to watch it when you have a moment. That way everybody can see it.
Yes. Yes. What trends or challenges do you see in preservation?
So do you mean by just in the museum itself
In
or as a
general?
whole?
Yeah, yeah. Just kind of what you're seeing from your corner of the world.
Sure. Well, I know nonprofits in general are having a hard time, especially from the pandemic. So that's been one thing that we've been having difficulty is getting interest in volunteers.
Mhm.
So people willing to do the legwork because oftentimes what I'm understanding is it's the same handful of people who are tackling the same thing over and over again. So we need to have more legacy training, if you will, so that way people can have somebody to come in and step up and either help carry on past traditions or programs. And also to just to have enough people to fill the space in order to, guide people through something, create new content, marketing, all the different aspects. It's just, I feel like having enough people has been a real challenge.
Yeah, I think that is a problem, and getting people re-engaged, because a lot of
Yeah,
the volunteers before were older, and so obviously they're,
that's
a little
true.
bit more
Yeah.
nervous, and
And priorities just shifted too,
yeah,
I feel.
yeah, very much so. So, before I kind of do my wrap up questions, is there anything that you thought of while we were talking that you wanted to share?
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, like I would just talk your ear off all day long if you'd let me. But no, like it's just one of these special places that is a great resource for the community. We do our events, but we try to diversify it in things for families and young kids, but also new things for people in the community to see. Last year, we did an art exhibit where different members of the community were able to submit their own artwork of historic landmarks throughout the city of Glendale. And then we sold off the pieces as a fundraiser for the museum. So it was a really great opportunity for us to have something new on display in our exhibit room to keep it fresh, but then also as a fundraiser. And we did plein air painting to go alongside it. We also do our Easter event every year where like 400 kids come out and hunt eggs on our lawn. And
Oh
it's
my
just,
goodness.
yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Right now we have a ceramics exhibit, which is entitled Ceramics of Glendale. So, wow. But we just kind of dived into why does Glendale have so many ceramic artists and pieces from the 1930s to the 1960s? And so we started exploring that. So, and I believe next year we're aiming to do an exhibit on Victorian dresses. But what I'm trying to say is we like to find variety. We like to try to make it as engaging as we can to the community. So that way everybody from every aspect can understand why this specific museum is important and contribute something new to them. We just had somebody come back from a school tour that they did like 30 years ago, and they were so excited to come back and revisit all of the familiar things that they saw throughout the house and relive their childhood in that way. So that was pretty special, I thought.
Yes. Yeah. I agree that like staying relevant is the way that you continue to grow, continue to engage people. So that's so important. But I I too just did a house tour and I told them, I said, I haven't been here since the 80s. And I'm sure that the girl I was talking to was not born. But we were back in Colorado where I was born, and I said, we had like a morning. I said, let's go see the Molly Brown house. I haven't been there, since I was, in elementary school. And so we went over, and they had really changed the programming, which I really appreciated. But I also was like, like the things that I remembered they weren't doing anymore. Like focused on like the Victorian like calling cards. I remember that was a big part of like the introduction. Like, this is where you'd put your calling card when you came to visit.
We have calling cards. We have a little designated place in the foyer.
So yeah, it was just, but that was my my experience. So I understand people wanting to come back. So how can someone support the organization?
Well, you can join the Glendale Historical Society. I know we are not close to each other at all, but anybody from anywhere can. We actually have we have a really great volunteer who lives in Pittsburgh now and is still very involved. So by all means, join.
Yeah.
And I would say just go forth and support your own local nonprofits.
Mhm.
See who needs what, because that's what we need right now, is just a community of people going out in the world to do what good they can and to support the people who need it. So look at your nonprofits, look at anything that you think your talents can shine at, whether it's leading tours or helping with their marketing or event planning. Anything is helpful. So either join the Glendale Historical Society or more.
Okay, very good. And then I will make sure where our website, like the not the website, where the show notes go, I will make sure that we have a link to the video for the investigation, or the webinar for the investigation, but also to the documentary. Is there anything else, any other contact information that I should list on that section?
Oh, sure. I mean, people can always email me if they have questions, and you have my email.
Yes.
And also I don't know. I had more thoughts, but they left me immediately.
Well, and I'll make sure the website's on, so people will.
Yeah.
Do you have social media?
Yeah, we do. We have a Facebook page. We actually have two. We have one specifically for the Doctor's House Museum, and then we also have one specifically for the Glendale Historical Society.
Okay, I'll put both of them on so that you have those. Okay, very good. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, anytime. Anytime you want to talk about my favorite place ever, we can definitely do that.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have a great day today.
You too.
Thanks for listening to the Practical Preservation Podcast. The resources discussed during this episode are on our website at practicalpreservationservices.com/podcast. If you received value from this episode and know someone else that will get value from it as well, please share it with them. Join us next week for another episode of the Practical Preservation Podcast. For more information on restoring your historic home, visit practicalpreservationservices.com.